I've got another little Christmassy thing. This is a bit longer. This one. This is like 16 pages or so.
Okay.
By Dickens, in a very like old smelling book, which is nice. This is called, excuse me, A Christmas Tree.
Just quickly.
What?
Good night, Erin.
Oh, good night, Arian. Have a good night.
Thank you for being
And
here.
yes, thank you for being here. It's very nice.
Yeah, and thank you again for the for the donation.
Yes, very much so. Oh, Christmassy things. You have a recommendation.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's good. Well, I'll read this and then recommend away.
Yeah.
A Christmas Tree. I have been looking on, this evening, at a merry company of children assembled around that pretty German toy, a Christmas tree. The tree was planted in the middle of a great round table and towered high above their heads. It was brilliantly lighted by a multitude of little tapers, and everywhere sparkled and glittered with bright objects. There were rosy-cheeked dolls hiding behind the green leaves, and there were real watches, with movable hands at least, and an endless capacity of being wound up, dangling from innumerable twigs. There were French polished tables, chairs, bedsteads, wardrobes, 8-day clocks, and various other articles of domestic furniture, wonderfully made, in tin, at Wolverhampton, perched among the boughs, as if in preparation for some fairy housekeeping. There were jolly, broad-faced little men, much more agreeable in appearance than many real men, and no wonder, for their heads took off and showed them to be full of sugar plums. There were fiddles and drums, there were tambourines, books, work boxes, paint boxes, sweetmeat boxes, peep-show boxes, and all kinds of boxes. There were trinkets for the elder girls, far brighter than any grown-up golden jewels. There were baskets and pincushions in all devices. There were guns, swords, and banners. There were witches standing in enchanted rings of pasteboard to tell fortunes. There were humming tops, needle cases, pen wipers, smelling bottles, conversation cards, bouquet holders, real fruit made artificially dazzling with gold leaf, imitation apples, pears, and walnuts, crammed with surprises. In short, as a pretty child before me delightedly whispered to another pretty child, her bosom friend, there was everything, and more. This motley collection of odd objects, clustering on the tree like magic fruit, and flashing back the bright looks directed towards it from every side, some of the diamond eyes admiring it were hardly on a level with the table, and a few were languishing in timid wonder on the bosoms of mothers, aunts, and nurses, made a lively realization of the fancies of childhood, and set me thinking how all the trees that grow, and all the things that come into existence on the earth, have their wild adornments at that well-remembered time. Being now at home again, and alone, the only person in the house awake, my thoughts are drawn back, by a fascination which I do not care to resist, to my own childhood. I begin to consider, what do we all remember best upon the branches of the Christmas tree of our own young Christmas days, by which we climbed to real life? Straight in the middle of the room, cramped in the freedom of its growth by no encircling walls or soon-reached ceiling, a shadowy tree arises, and, looking up into the dreamy brightness of its top, for I observe in this tree the singular property that it appears to grow downward towards the earth, I look into my youngest Christmas recollections. All toys at first, I find. Up yonder, among the green holly and red berries, is the tumbler with his hands in his pockets, who wouldn't lie down, but whenever he was put upon the floor persisted in rolling his body about, until he rolled himself still, and brought those lobster eyes of his to bear upon me, when I affected to laugh very much, but in my heart of hearts was extremely doubtful of him. Close beside him is that infernal snuff-box, out of which there sprang a demoniacal counsellor in a black gown, with an obnoxious head of hair, and a red mouth wide open, who was not to be endured on any terms, but could not be put away either, for he used suddenly, in a highly magnified state, to fly out of mammoth snuff-boxes in dreams when least expected. Nor is the frog with cobbler's wax on his tail far off, for there was no knowing where he wouldn't jump, and when he flew over the candle and came upon one's hand with that spotted back, red on a green ground, he was horrible. The cardboard lady in a blue silk skirt, who was stood up against the candlestick to dance, and whom I see on the same branch, was milder, and was beautiful, but I can't say as much for the larger cardboard man, who used to be hung against the wall and pulled by a string. There was a sinister expression in that nose of his, and when he got his legs round his neck, which he very often did, he was ghastly, and not a creature to be alone with. When did that dreadful mask first look at me? Who put it on? And why was I so frightened that the sight of it is an era in my life? It is not a hideous visage in itself. It is even meant to be droll. Why then were its stolid features so intolerable? Surely not because it hid the wearer's face. An apron would have done as much, and though I should have preferred even the apron away, it would have not been absolutely insupportable like the mask. Was it the immovability of the mask? The doll's face was immovable, but I was not afraid of her. Perhaps that fixed and set change coming over a real face infused into my quickened heart some remote suggestion and dread of the universal change that is to come on every face and make it still. Nothing reconciled me to it. No drummers, from whom proceeded a melancholy chirping on the turning of the handle, no regiment of soldiers, with a mute band taken out of a box and fitted one by one upon a stiff and lazy little set of lazy tongs. No old woman made of wires in a brown paper composition cutting up a pie for 2 small children could give me a permanent comfort for a long time. Nor was it any satisfaction to be shown the mask and see that it was made of paper, or to have it locked up and be assured that no one wore it. The mere recollection of that fixed face, the mere knowledge of its existence anywhere, was sufficient to awake in me all the night, all perspiration and horror, with, "Oh, I know it's coming! Oh, the mask!" I never wondered what the dear old donkey with the panniers, there he is, was made of then. His hide was real to the touch, I recollect. And the great black horse with the round red spots all over him, a horse that I could never even get upon. I never wondered what had brought him to that strange condition, or thought that such a horse was not commonly seen at Newmarket. The 4 horses of no colour next to him that went into the waggon of cheeses and could be taken out and stabled under the piano appear to have bits of fur tippet for their tails, and other bits for their manes, and to stand on pegs instead of legs. But it was not so when they were brought home for a Christmas present. They were all right then. Neither was their harness unceremoniously nailed into their chests, as appears to be the case now. The tinkling works of the music cart I did find out to be made of quill, toothpicks and wire, and I always thought that little tumbler in his shirt sleeves, perpetually swarming up one side of a wooden frame and coming down head foremost on the other, rather a weak-minded person, though good-natured, but the Jacob's ladder next to him made of little squares of red wood that went flapping and clattering over one another, each developing a different picture, and the whole enlivened by small bells, was a mighty marvel and a great delight. Ah, the doll's house, of which I was not proprietor, but where I visited. I don't admire the Houses of Parliament half so much as that stone-fronted mansion with real glass windows and doorsteps, and a real balcony, greener than I ever see now, except at watering places, and even they afford but a poor imitation. And though it did open all at once, the entire house front, which was a blow, I admit, as cancelling the fiction of a staircase, it was but to shut it up again, and I could believe. Even open there were 3 distinct rooms in it, a sitting-room and bedroom, elegantly furnished, and best of all a kitchen, with uncommonly soft fire-irons, a plentiful assortment of diminutive utensils, the warming pan, and a tin man cook in profile, who was always going to fry 2 fish. What justice have I done to the noble feasts wherein the set of wooden platters figured, each with its own peculiar delicacy, as a ham or turkey glued tight to it, and garnished with something green, which I recollect as moss? Could all the temperance societies of these later days united give me such a tea-drinking as I have had through the means of yonder little set of blue crockery, which really would hold liquid? It ran out of the small wooden cask, I recollect, and tasted of matches, and which made tea nectar. And if the two legs of the ineffectual little sugar tongs did tumble over one another and want purpose like Punch's hands, what does it matter? And if I did once shriek out as a poisoned child and strike the fashionable company with consternation by reason of having drunk a little teaspoon inadvertently dissolved in too hot tea, I was never the worse for it, except by a powder. Upon the next branches of the tree lower down, hard by the green roller and miniature gardening tools, how thick the books began to hang. The books in themselves at first, but many of them, and with deliciously smooth covers of bright red or green. What fat black letters to begin with! A was an archer and shot at a frog. Of course he was. He was an apple pie also, and there he is. He was a good many things in his time, was A, and so were most of his friends, except X, who had so little versatility that I never knew him to get beyond Xerxes or Xantippe, like Y, who was always confined to a yacht or a yew tree, and Z condemned forever ever to be a zebra. But now the very tree itself changes and becomes a beanstalk, the marvellous beanstalk up which Jack climbed to the giant's house. And now those dreadfully interesting double-headed giants, with their clubs over their shoulders, begin to stride along the boughs in a perfect throng, dragging knights and ladies home for dinner by the hair of their heads. And Jack, how noble, with his sword of sharpness and his shoes of swiftness. Again those old meditations come upon me as I gaze up at him, and I debate within myself whether there was more than one Jack, which I am loath to believe possible, or only one genuine, original, admirable Jack, who achieved all the recorded exploits. Good for Christmas time is the ruddy colour of the cloak, in which, the tree making a forest of itself for her trip through with her basket, Little Red Riding Hood comes to me one Christmas Eve to give me information of the cruelty and treachery of that dissembling wolf who ate her grandmother, without making any impression on his appetite, and then ate her, after making that ferocious joke about his teeth. She was my first love. I felt that if I could have married Little Red Riding Hood, I should have known perfect bliss. But it was not to be, and there was nothing for it but to look out for the wolf in the Noah's Ark there, and put him late in the procession on the table as a monster who was to be degraded. Oh, the wonderful Noah's Ark! It was not found seaworthy when put in a washing tub, and the animals were crammed in at the roof and needed to have their legs well shaken down before they could be got in, even there, and then 10 to 1 but they began to tumble out at the door, which was but imperfectly fastened with a wire latch. But what was that against it? Consider the noble fly, a size or two smaller than the elephant. The ladybird, the butterfly, all triumphs of art. Consider the goose, whose feet were so small, and whose balance was so indifferent that he usually tumbled forward and knocked down all the animal creation. Consider Noah and his family, like tobacco stoppers, and how the leopards stuck to warm little fingers, and how the tails of the larger animals used gradually to resolve themselves into frayed bits of string. Hush! Again in a forest, and somebody up in a tree. Not Robin Hood, not Valentine, not the Yellow Dwarf. I have passed him and all Mother Bunch's wonders without mention. But a king with a glittering scimitar and turban. 2 eastern kings, for I see another looking over his shoulder. Down upon the grass at the tree's foot lies the full length of a giant, stretched asleep, with his head in a lady's lap, and near them is a glass box, fastened with 4 locks of shining steel, in which he keeps the lady prisoner when he is awake. I see the 4 keys at his girdle now. The lady makes signs to the 2 kings in the tree, who softly descend. It is the setting in of the bright Arabian Nights. Oh, now all common things become uncommon and enchanted to me. All lamps are wonderful, all rings are talismans. Common flower pots are full of treasure, with a little earth scattered on the top. Trees are for Ali Baba to hide in. Beefsteaks are to throw down into the valley of diamonds, that the precious stones may stick to them, to be carried by the eagles to their nests, whence the traders with loud cries will scare them. tarts are made, according to the recipe of the vizier's son of Bussorah, who turned pastry cook after he was set down in his drawers at the gate of Damascus. Cobblers are all Mustafas, and in the habit of sewing up people cut into 4 pieces, to whom they are taken blindfold. Any iron ring let into stone is the entrance to a cave which only waits for the magician, and the little fire, and the necromancy that will make the earth shake. All the dates imported come from the same tree as that unlucky date, with whose shell the merchant knocked out the eye of the genie's invisible son. All olives are of the stock of that fresh fruit, concerning which the commander of the faithful overheard the boy conduct the fictitious trial of the fraudulent olive merchant. All apples are akin to the apple purchased, with 2 others, from the Sultan's gardener for 3 sequins, and which the tall slave stole from the child. All dogs are associated with the dog, really a transformed man, who jumped upon the baker's counter and put his paw on the piece of bad money. All rice recalls the rice of which the awful lady who was a ghoul could only peck by grains because of her nightly feasts in the burial place. My very rocking horse, there he is with his nostrils turned completely inside out, indicative of blood, should have a peg in his neck, by virtue thereof to fly away with me, as the wooden horse did with the Prince of Persia in the sight of all his father's court. Yes, on every object that I recognise among those upper branches of my Christmas tree, I see this fairy light. When I wake in bed at daybreak, on the cold, dark winter mornings, the white snow dimly beheld outside through the frost on the window-pane, I hear Dinazade, "Sister, sister, if you are awake, I pray you finish the history of the young king of the Black Islands." Scheherazade replies, "If my lord the Sultan will suffer me to live another day, sister, I will not only finish that, but tell you a more wonderful story yet." Then the gracious Sultan goes out, giving no orders for the execution, and we all 3 breathe again. At this height of my tree, I begin to see, cowering among the leaves, it may be born of turkey, or of pudding, or mince pie, or of these many fancies, jumbled with Robinson Crusoe on his desert island, Philip Quarle among the monkeys, Sanford and Merton with Mr. Barlow, Mother Bunch and the Mask, or it may be the result of indigestion, assisted by imagination and over-doctoring, a prodigious nightmare. It is so exceedingly indistinct that I don't know why it's frightful, but I know it is. I can only make out that it is an immense array of shapeless things which appear to be planted on a vast exaggeration of the lazy tongs that used to bear the toy soldiers, and to be slowly coming close to my eyes and receding to an immeasurable distance. When it comes closest, it is worse. In connection with it I descry remembrances of winter nights incredibly long, of being sent early to bed as a punishment for some small offence, and waking in 2 hours with a sensation of having been asleep 2 nights, of the laden hopelessness of morning ever dawning, and the oppression of a weight of remorse. And now I see a wonderful row of little lights rise smoothly out of the ground before a vast green curtain. Now a bell rings, a magic bell, which still sounds in my ears unlike all other bells, and music plays amidst a buzz of voices, and a fragrant smell of orange peel and oil. Anon the magic bell commands the music to cease, and the great green curtain rolls itself up majestically, and the play begins. The devoted dog of Montegris avenges the death of his master, foully murdered in the forest of Bondy, and a humorous peasant with a red nose and a very little hat, whom I take from this hour forth to my bosom as a friend. I think he was a waiter or an ostler at the village inn, but many years have passed since he and I have met, remarks that the sagacity of that dog is indeed surprising, and evermore this jocular conceit will live in my remembrance fresh and unfading, overtopping all possible jokes until the end of time. Or now I learn with bitter tears how poor Jane Shore, dressed all in white and with her brown hair hanging down, went starving through the streets, or how George Barnwell killed the worthiest uncle that ever man had, and was afterwards so sorry for it that he ought to have been left off. Come swift to comfort me, the pantomime. Stupendous phenomenon, when clowns are shot from loaded mortars into the great chandelier, bright constellation that it is, when harlequins, covered all over with scales of pure gold, twist and sparkle like amazing fish. When Pantaloon, whom I deem it no irreverence to compare in my own mind to my grandfather, puts red-hot pokers in his pocket and cries, "Here's somebody coming," or taxes the clown with petty larceny by saying, "Now I saw you do it." When everything is capable, with the greatest ease, of being changed into anything, and nothing is but thinking makes it so. Now, too, I perceive my first experience of the dreary sensation, often to return in afterlife, of being unable next day to get back to the dull, settled world, of wanting to live for ever in the bright atmosphere I have quitted, of doting on the little fairy with the wand like a celestial barber's pole, and pining for a fairy immortality along with her. Ah, she comes back in many shapes as my eye wanders down the branches of my Christmas tree, and goes as often and has never yet stayed by me. Out of this delight springs the toy theatre. There it is, with its familiar proscenium and ladies in feathers in the boxes, and all its attendant occupation with paste and glue and gum and watercolours in the getting up of the miller and his men, and Elizabeth, or the exile of Siberia. In spite of a few besetting accidents and failures, particularly an unreasonable disposition in the respectable Kelmar, and some others to become faint in the legs and double up at exciting points of the drama, a teeming world of fancy so suggestive and all-embracing that, far below it on my Christmas tree, I see dark, dirty, real theatres in the daytime, adorned with these associations as with the freshest garlands of the rarest flowers, and charming me yet. But hark! The waits are playing, and they break my childish sleep. What images do I associate with the Christmas music as I see them set forth on the Christmas tree? Known before all the others, keeping far apart from all the others, they gather round my little bed. An angel speaking to a group of shepherds in a field, some travellers with eyes uplifted following a star, a baby in a manger, a child in a spacious temple talking with grave men, a solemn figure with a mild and beautiful face raising a dead girl by the hand, again near a city gate calling back the son of a widow on his bier to life. A crowd of people looking through the opened roof of a chamber where he sits, and letting down a sick person on a bed with ropes. The same in a tempest, walking on the water to a ship. Again on a seashore, teaching a great multitude. Again with a child upon his knee and other children round. Restoring sight to the blind, speech to the dumb, hearing to the deaf, health to the sick, strength to the lame, knowledge to the ignorant. Again, dying upon a cross, watched by armed soldiers, a thick darkness coming on, the earth beginning to shake, and only one voice heard, "Forgive them, for they know what they do." Still, on the lower and maturer branches of the tree, Christmas associations cluster thick. Schoolbooks shut up, Ovid and Virgil silenced, the Rule of Three, with its cool, impertinent inquiries, long disposed of. Terence and Plautus acted no more, in an arena of huddled desks and forms, all chipped and notched and inked. Cricket bats, stumps and balls, left higher up, with the smell of trodden grass and the softened noise of shouts in the evening air. The tree is still fresh, still gay. If I no more come home at Christmas time, there will be boys and girls, thank heaven, while the world lasts, and they do. Yonder they dance and play upon the branches of my tree. God bless them merrily, and my heart dances and plays too. And I do come home at Christmas. We all do, or we all should. We all come home, or ought to come home for a short holiday, the longer the better, from the great boarding school where we are forever working at our arithmetical slates. To take and give a rest. As to going a-visiting, where we can not go if we will, where we have not been when we would, starting our fancy from our Christmas tree. Away into the winter prospect. There are many such upon the tree, on by low-lying misty grounds, through fens and fogs, up long hills, winding dark as caverns between thick plantations, almost shutting out the sparkling stars, so out on broad heights, until we stop at last, with sudden silence, at an avenue. The gate bell has a deep, half-awful sound in the frosty air. The gate swings open on its hinges, and as we drive up to a great house, the glancing lights grow larger in the windows, and the opposing rows of trees seem to fall solemnly back on either side to give us place. At intervals, all day, a frightened hare has shot across this whitened turf, or the distant clatter of a herd of deer trampling the hard frost has, for the minute, crushed the silence too. Their watchful eyes beneath the fern may be shining now, if we could see them, like the icy dewdrops on the leaves, but they are still, and all is still. And so, the lights growing larger, and the trees falling back before us, and closing up again behind us, as if to forbid retreat, we come to the house. There is probably a smell of roasted chestnuts and other good comfortable things all the time, for we are telling winter stories, ghost stories, or more shame for us, round the Christmas fire, and we have never stirred, except to draw a little closer to it. But no matter for that. We came to the house, and it is an old house, full of great chimneys where wood is burnt on ancient dogs upon the hearth, and grim portraits, some of them with grim legends too, lower distrustfully from the oaken panels of the walls. We are a middle-aged nobleman, and we make a generous supper with our host and hostess and their guests, it being Christmas time and the old house full of company, and then we go to bed. Our room is a very old room. It is hung with tapestry. We don't like the portrait of a cavalier in green over the fireplace. There are great black beams in the ceiling, and there is a great black bedstead, supported at the foot by two great black figures, who seem to have come off a couple of tombs in the old baronial church in the park for our particular accommodation. But we are not a superstitious nobleman, and we don't mind. Well, we dismiss our servant, lock the door, and sit before the fire in our dressing gown, musing about a great many things. At length we go to bed. Well, we can't sleep. We toss and tumble and can't sleep. The embers on the hearth burn fitfully and make the room look ghostly. We can't help peeping out over the counterpane at the two black figures and the cavalier, that wicked-looking cavalier in green. In the flickering light they seem to advance and retire, which, though we are not by any means a superstitious nobleman, is not agreeable. We get nervous, more and more nervous. We say, "This is very foolish, but we can't stand this. We'll pretend to be ill and knock someone's door." Well, we are just going to do it, when the locked door opens, and there comes in a young woman, deadly pale, and with long fair hair, who glides to the fire and sits down in the chair we have left there, wringing her hands. Then we notice that our clothes are wet. Our tongue cleaves to the roof of our mouth, and we can't speak, but we observe her accurately. Her clothes are wet. Her long hair is dabbled with moist mud. She is dressed in the fashion of 200 years ago, and she has at her girdle a bunch of rusty keys. Well, there she sits, and we can't even faint, we are in such a state about it. Presently she gets up and tries all the locks in the room with the rusty keys, which won't fit one of them. Then she fixes her eyes on the portrait of the cavalier in green, and says in a low, terrible voice, "The stags know it." After that she wrings her hands again, passes the bedside, and goes out at the door. We hurry on our dressing gowns, seize our pistols, we always travel with pistols, and are following, when we find the door locked. We turn the key, look out into the dark gallery. No one there. We wander away and try to find our servant. Can't be done. We pace the gallery till daybreak, then return to our deserted room, fall asleep, and are awakened by our servant. Nothing ever haunts him. And the shining sun. We make a wretched breakfast, and all the company say we look queer. After breakfast, we go over the house with our host, and then we take him to the portrait of the cavalier in green, and then it all comes out. He was false to a young housekeeper once attached to that family, and famous for her beauty, who drowned herself in a pond, and whose body was discovered after a long time because the stags refused to drink of the water. Since which it has been whispered that she traverses the house at midnight, but goes especially to that room where the cavalier in green was wont to sleep, trying the old locks with the rusty keys. Well, we tell our host of what we have seen, and a shade comes over his features, and he begs it may be hushed up, and so it is. But it's all true, and we said so before we died, we are dead now, to many responsible people. There is no end to the old houses, with resounding galleries, and dismal state bedchambers, and haunted wings shut up for many years, through which we may ramble, with an agreeable creeping up our back, and encounter any number of ghosts, but it is worthy of remark, perhaps, reducible to very few general types and classes, for ghosts have little originality and walk in a beaten track. Thus it comes to pass that a certain room in a certain old hall, where a certain bad lord, baronet, knight, or gentleman shot himself, has certain planks in the floor from which the blood will not be taken out. You may scrape and scrape, as the present owner has done, or plane and plane, as his father did, or scrub and scrub, as his grandfather did, or burn and burn with strong acids, as his great-grandfather did, but there the blood will still be, no redder and no paler, no more and no less, always just the same. Thus, in such another house, there is a haunted door that will never keep open, or another door that will never keep shut, or a haunted sound of a spinning wheel, or a hammer, or a footstep, or a cry, or a sigh, or a horse's tramp, or the rattling of a chain. Or else there is a turret clock, which at the midnight hour strikes 13, when the head of the family is going to die, or a shadowy, immovable black carriage, which at such a time is always seen by somebody waiting near the great gates in the stable yard. Or thus it came to pass how Lady Mary went to pay a visit at a large wild house in the Scottish Highlands, and being fatigued with her long journey, retired to bed early, and innocently said next morning at the breakfast table, "How odd to have so late a party last night in this remote place, and not to tell me of it before I went to bed." Then every one asks Lady Mary what she meant. Then Lady Mary replies, "Why, all night long the carriages were driving round and round and round the terrace underneath my window." Then the owner of the house turns pale, and so does his lady, and Charles Macdoodle of Macdoodle sighs to Lady Mary to say no more, and every one is silent. After breakfast, Charles Macdoodle tells Lady Mary that it was a tradition in the family that those rumbling carriages on the terrace betokened death. And so it proves, for 2 months afterwards the lady of the mansion dies. And Lady Mary, who was a maid of honour at court, often told this story to old Queen Charlotte by this token that the old king always said, "Eh, what? Ghosts, no such thing," and never left off saying so until he went to bed. Or a friend of somebody's whom most of us know, when he was a young man at college, had a particular friend with whom he made the compact that if it were possible for the spirit to return to this earth after its separation from the body, he of the twain who first died should reappear to the other. In course of time, this compact was forgotten by our friend, the 2 young men having progressed in life and taken diverging paths that were wide asunder. But one night, many years afterwards, our friend being in the north of England and staying for the night on an inn in the Yorkshire moors, happened to look out of bed, and there, in the moonlight, leaning on a bureau near the window, steadfastly regarding him, saw his old college friend. The appearance being solemnly addressed, replied in a kind of whisper, but very audibly, "Do not come near me. I am dead. I am here to redeem my promise. I come from another world, but may not disclose its secrets." Then the whole form, becoming paler, melted, as it were, into the moonlight, and faded away. Or it was a certain sensible old maiden lady, who died at 99, and retained her faculties to the last, who really did see the orphan boy, a story which has often been incorrectly told, but of which the real truth is this, because it is, in fact, a story belonging to our family, and she was a connection to our family. When she was about 40 years of age, and still an uncommonly fine woman, her lover died young, which was the reason she never remarried, though she had many offers. She went to stay at a place in Kent, which her brother, an Indian merchant, had newly bought. There was a story that this place had once been held in trust by the guardian of a young boy, who was himself the next heir, and who killed the young boy by harsh and cruel treatment. She knew nothing of that. It had been said that there was a cage in her bedroom in which the guardian used to put the boy. There was no such thing. There was only a closet. She went to bed, made no alarm whatever in the night, and in the morning said composedly to her maid when she came in, "Who is the pretty forlorn-looking child who has been peeping out of that closet all night?" The maid replied by giving a loud scream and instantly decamping. She was surprised, but she was a woman of remarkable strength of mind, and she dressed herself and went downstairs and closeted herself with her brother. "Now, Walter," she said, "I have been disturbed all night by a pretty forlorn-looking boy who has been constantly peeping out of that closet in my room, which I can't open. This is some trick." "I am afraid not, Charlotte," said he, "for it is the legend of the house. It is the orphan boy." "What did he do?" "He opened the door softly," said she, "and peeped out. Sometimes he came a step or two into the room, and then I called to him to encourage him, and he shrunk and shuddered and crept in again and shut the door." "The closet has no communication, Charlotte," said her brother, "with any other part of the house, and it's nailed up." This was undeniably true, and it took 2 carpenters a whole forenoon to get it open for examination. Then she was satisfied that she had seen the orphan boy. But the wild and terrible part of the story is that he was also seen by 3 of her brother's sons in succession, who all died young. On the occasion of each child being taken ill, he came home in a heat 12 hours before and said, "Oh, mamma, he had been playing under a particular oak tree in a certain meadow with a strange boy, a pretty forlorn-looking boy, who was very timid and made signs." From fatal experience, the parents came to know that this was the orphan boy, and that the course of that child whom he chose for his little playmate was surely run. Legion is the name of the German castles where we sit up alone to wait for the spectre, where we are shown into a room made comparatively cheerful for our reception, where we glance round at the shadows thrown on the blank walls by the crackling fire, where we feel very lonely when the village innkeeper and his pretty daughter have retired, after laying down a fresh store of wood upon the hearth, and setting forth on the small table such a supper cheer as a cold roast capon, bread, grapes, and a flask of old Rhine wine, where the reverberating doors close on their retreat one after another, like so many peals of sullen thunder, and where, about the small hours of the night, we come into the knowledge of diverse supernatural mysteries. Legion is the name of the haunted German students, in whose society we draw yet nearer to the fire, while the schoolboy in the corner opens his eyes wide and round, and flies off the footstool he has chosen for his seat when the door accidentally blows open. Vast is the crop of such fruit shining on our Christmas tree, in blossom almost at the very top, ripening all down the boughs. Among the later toys and fancies hanging there, as idle often and less pure, be the images once associated with the sweet old waits, the softened music in the night, ever unalterable. Encircled by the social thoughts of Christmas time, still let the benignant figure of my childhood stand unchanged. In every cheerful image and suggestion that the season brings, may the bright star that rested above the poor roof be the star of all the world. A moment's pause, O vanishing tree, of which the lower boughs are dark to me as yet, and let me look once more. I know that there are blank spaces on thy branches, where eyes that I have loved have shone and smiled, from which they are departed. But, far above, I see the razor of the dead girl and the widow's son, and God is good. If age be hiding for me in the unseen portion of thy downward growth, oh, may I, with a grey head, turn a child's heart to that figure yet, and a child's trustfulness and confidence. Now the tree is decorated with bright merriment, and song and dance and cheerfulness, and they are welcome. Innocent and welcome be they ever held, beneath the branches of the Christmas tree, which cast no gloomy shadow. But, as it sinks into the ground, I hear a whisper going through the leaves. This, in commemoration of the law of love and kindness, mercy and compassion. This, in remembrance of me. And that's thank you. And that's Dickens writes lists. It's like I could say like one ghost story. No, I shall say all of them. Here's some examples. Like Dickens like channeling Verne.
Yeah.
It's got a word count. That's true. That probably is actually one of his ones that he would put in as a I forgot what you call them now.
Book.
Thank you.
Journal.
No, he sort of. Oh, what do you actually? There is an actual name for sort of episodic. So the way he'd do a lot of his stories he would put chapters in newspapers.
Oh, right.
So they do it basically. It's basically their version of like Netflix.
Yeah.
They'd have an episode per newspaper, pretty much.
Yeah.
And I can't think of the actual term for that. But yeah, he had a word count that he had to meet for those. And yes, you got to go. Oh, bye salad. Thank you for thank you for being here. And I saw who else disappeared. Is it Teddy?
Yeah.
Teddy has gone. Column. It's kind of. It's not. It's something else. Yeah, I can't remember. But yes. Sil, did you say you had a recommendation? I guess we can probably read maybe one more thing and then call it there.
Yeah,
because we did take some time out for breaks.
Yeah,
and
we've had a lot of like time out, so I'm happy to go on a bit longer. I mean, it depends how long it is. If it's like a
how long
or
is
shorter
your
piece.
recommendation?
I'd be happy to do another one of these after Christmas, assuming my laptop's like.
What, just like a hangout and recommend and stuff? Yeah, definitely.
I'm happy, yeah.
Maybe we should do like one a month or something.
Yeah, so this is nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be nice to somehow do it where we're both in the same room.
Yeah. Yeah, like any time I'm visiting or you're visiting.
Yeah.
If we're able to.
Not that long. Simultaneous to. He's actually okay, that's amazing.
Oh, Hans Christian Andersen.
Oh, awesome.
Right.
Okay. Do you want to read this? You can read this.
I can give it a go.
He actually stayed uninvited at Dickens's place for 2 weeks until he's thrown out. Really? That's hilarious. I love it. Good old Hans Christian Andersen. Just like, hey Dickens, you don't mind me crashing at your place, do you? Well, I'm gonna.
I'm googling it on my phone because I don't have an easy way to like click that link.
Oh,
on my
I could
phone.
just send you. If you can't find it.
I have found a thing.
Ooh. Oh, you're also heading off to Bedbreaker? Drafting pattern for nice. Yeah, well, you go have good rest, good sleep.
I have a number of different sources for it.
The holiday spot apparently is the one.
I mean, yeah,
Sil's
if
got.
you've got Discord open, you don't have Discord open.
We are good.
Yeah. I mean, good news. The internet seems to be holding up now, so I'm guessing it is that connection that is warped.
Yeah. Oh, he was invited. I don't know. He was a big fan of Dickens. That's really cool. Oh, he got depressed and couldn't move. Oh. There's me thinking he was just like staying there to spite Dickens, which
just
was
like
very amusing. But
yeah,
nope.
dodgy roommate. Just like, hey, no,
Great.
Hans, please.
There you go.
But actually, right. Yeah, sure. Give me those cookies. And adverts. Righto. No, I just got rid of that advert. Right. Okay.
Good night, Rakers.
Good night. Thank you for being here.
Have a great. Anyone who's off or has
Yeah.
been off. Have a great Christmas
Indeed.
and New Year, and I hope things improve for all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would be good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess I'll crack on with this.
Do you want the mic?
Sure.
Yep.
I have not read this before, so this will be completely new. And read off my phone, which is not my preferred way to read, but, hey, we'll manage. So yeah, this is The Fir Tree by Hans Christian Andersen. Out in the woods stood a nice little fir tree. The place he had was a very good one. The sun shone on him. As to fresh air, there was enough of that, and round him grew many large-sized comrades, pines as well as firs. But the little fir wanted so very much to be a grown-up tree. He did not think of the warm sun and of the fresh air. He did not care for the little cottage children that ran about and prattled when they were in the woods looking for wild strawberries. The children often came with a whole pitcher full of berries, or a long row of them threaded on a straw, and sat down near the young tree and said, "Oh, how pretty he is! What a nice little fir!" But this was what the tree could not bear to hear. At the end of a year he had shot up a good deal, and after another year he was another long bit taller, for with fir trees one can always tell by the shoots how many years old they are. "Oh, were I but such a high tree as the others are," sighed he, "then I should be able to spread up my branches and with the tops to look at the wide world. Then would the birds build nests among my branches, and when there was a breeze I could bend with as much stateliness as the others." Neither the sunbeams, nor the birds, nor the red clouds which morning and evening sailed above them gave the little tree any pleasure. In winter, when the snow lay glittering on the ground, a hare would often come leaping along and jump right over the little tree. Oh, so that made him so angry. But 2 winters were past, and in the 3rd the tree was so large that the hare was obliged to go round it. To grow and grow, to get older and be tall, thought the tree, that, after all, is the most delightful thing in the world. In autumn, the woodcutters always came and felled some of the largest trees. This happened every year, and the young fir tree, that had now grown to a very comely size, trembled at the sight, for the magnificent great trees fell to the earth with noise and cracking, the branches were lopped off, and the trees looked long and bare. They were hardly to be recognized, and then they were laid in carts, and the horses dragged them out of the woods. Where did they go to? What became of them? In spring, when the swallows and the storks came, the tree asked them, "Don't you know where they have been taken? Have you not met them anywhere?" The swallows did not know anything about it, but the stork looked musing, nodded his head, and said, "Yes, I think I know. I met many ships as I was flying hither from Egypt. On the ships were magnificent masts, and I venture to assert that it was they that smelt so of fir. I may congratulate you, for they lifted themselves on high most majestically. Oh, were I but old enough to fly across the sea! But how does the sea look in reality? What is it like?" "That would take a long time to explain," said the stork, and with these words off he went. "Rejoice in thy growth," said the sunbeams. "Rejoice in thy vigorous growth, and in the fresh life that moveth within thee." And the wind kissed the tree, and the dew wept tears over him, but the fir understood it not. When Christmas came, quite young trees were cut down. Trees which often were not even as large or of the same age as the fir tree, who could never rest but always wanted to be off. These young trees, and they were always the finest looking, retained their branches. They were laid on carts, and the horses drew them out of the woods. "Where are they going to?" asked the fir. "They are not taller than I. There was one indeed that was considerably shorter. And why do they retain all their branches? Whither are they taken?" We know, chirped the sparrows. "We have peeped in at the windows in the town below. We know whither they are taken. The greatest splendour and the greatest magnificence one can imagine await them. We peeped through the windows and saw them planted in the middle of the warm room and ornamented with the most splendid things, with gilded apples, with gingerbread, with toys, and many hundred lights. And then? Asked the fir tree, trembling in every bough. And then? What happens then? We did not see anything more. It was incomparably beautiful. I would fain know if I am destined for so glorious a career, cried the tree, rejoicing. That is still better than to cross the sea. What a longing do I suffer! Were Christmas but come! I am now tall, and my branches spread like the others that were carried off last year. Oh, were I but already on the cart! Were I in the warm room with all the splendour and magnificence! Yes, then something better, something still grander will surely follow, or wherefore should they thus ornament me? Something better, something still grander must follow, but what? Oh, how I long, how I suffer! I do not know myself what is the matter with me. Rejoice in our presence, said the air and the sunlight. Rejoice in thy own fresh youth. But the tree did not rejoice at all. He grew and was green both winter and summer. People that saw him said, "What a fine tree!" And toward Christmas he was one of the first that was cut down. The axe struck deep into the very pith. The tree fell to the earth with a sigh. He felt a pang. It was like a swoon. He could not think of happiness, for he was sorrowful at being separated from his home, from the place where he had sprung up. He knew well that he should never see his dear old comrades, the little bushes and flowers around him, any more, perhaps not even the birds. The departure was not at all agreeable. The tree only came to himself when he was unloaded in a courtyard with the other trees and heard a man say, "That one's splendid. We don't want the others." Then 2 servants came in rich livery and carried the fir tree into a large and splendid drawing-room. Portraits were hanging on the walls, and near the white porcelain stove stood 2 large Chinese vases with lions on the covers. There, too, were large easy chairs, silken sofas, large tables full of picture books, and full of toys worth hundreds and hundreds of crowns. At least the children said so. And the fir tree was stuck upright in a cask that was filled with sand, but no one could see that it was a cask, for green cloth was hung all round it, and it stood on a large gaily coloured carpet. Oh, how the tree quivered! What was to happen? The servants, as well as the young ladies, decorated it. On one branch there hung little nets cut out of coloured paper, and each net was filled with sugar plums, and among the other boughs gilded apples and walnuts were suspended, looking as though they had grown there, and little blue and white tapers were placed among the leaves. Dolls that looked for all the world like men, the tree had never beheld such before, were seen among the foliage, and at the very top a large star of gold tinsel was fixed. It was really splendid, beyond description splendid. "This evening," said they all, "how it will shine this evening!" Oh, thought the tree, if the evening were but come, if the tapers were but lighted, and then I wonder what will happen. Perhaps the other trees in the forest will come to look at me. Perhaps the sparrows will beat against the window panes. I wonder if I shall take root here, and winter and summer stand covered with ornaments. He knew very much about the matter, but he was so impatient for that sheer longing he got a pain in his back, and this with trees is the same thing as a headache with us. The candles were now lighted. What brightness! What splendour! The tree trembled so in every bough that one of the tapers set fire to the foliage. It blazed up splendidly. "Help! Help!" cried the young ladies, and they quickly put out the fire. Now the tree did not even dare tremble. What a state he was in! He was so uneasy lest he should lose something of his splendour that he was quite bewildered amidst the glare and brightness, when suddenly both folding doors opened, and a troop of children rushed in as if they would upset the tree. The older persons followed quietly. The little ones stood quite still. But it was only for a moment. Then they shouted so that the whole place re-echoed with their rejoicing. They danced round the tree, and one present after the other was pulled off. "What are they about?" thought the tree. "What is to happen now?" And the lights burned down to the very branches, and as they burned down they were put out, one after the other, and then the children had permission to plunder the tree. So they fell upon it with such violence that all its branches cracked. If it had not been fixed firmly to the cask, it would certainly have tumbled down. The children danced about with their beautiful playthings. No one looked at the tree except the old nurse, who peeped between the branches. But it was only to see if there was a fig or an apple left that had been forgotten. "A story! A story!" cried the children, drawing a little fat man toward the tree. He seated himself under it and said, "Now we are in the shade, and the tree can listen too. But I shall tell only one story. Now, which will you have? That about Ivedy-Avedy, or about Klumpy Dumpy, who tumbled downstairs, and yet after all came to the throne and married the princess?" "Ivedy-Avedy!" cried some. "Klumpy Dumpy!" cried the others. There was such a bawling and screaming. The fir tree alone was silent, and he thought to himself, "Am I not to bawl with the rest? Am I to do nothing whatever?" For he was one of the company, and had done what he had to do. The man told about Klumpy Dumpy that tumbled down, who, notwithstanding, came to the throne, and at last married the princess. And the children clapped their hands and cried out, "Oh, go on, do go on!" Then they wanted to hear about Ivedy-Avedy too, but the little man only told them about Klumpy Dumpy. The fir tree stood quite still and absorbed in thought. The birds in the woods had never related the like of this. Klumpy Dumpy fell downstairs, and yet he married the princess. Yes, yes, that's the way of the world, thought the fir tree. He believed it all, because the man who told the story was so good-looking. "Well, well, who knows, perhaps I may fall downstairs too, and get a princess as wife." And he looked forward with joy to the morrow, when he hoped to be decked out again with lights, playthings, fruits, and tinsel. "I won't tremble tomorrow," thought the fir tree. "I will enjoy to the full all my splendour. Tomorrow I shall hear again the story of Klumpy Dumpy, and perhaps that of Ivedy-Avedy too." And the whole night the tree stood still in the deep thought. In the morning the servant and the housemaid came in. "Now, then, the splendour will begin again," thought the fir. But they dragged him out of the room, and up the stairs into the loft. And here, in a dark corner where no daylight could enter, they left him. "What's the meaning of this?" thought the tree. "What am I to do here? What shall I hear now, I wonder?" And he leaned against the wall, lost in reverie. Time enough had he, too, for his reflections, for days and nights passed on, and nobody came up. And when at last somebody did come, it was only to put some great trunks in a corner out of the way. There stood the tree, quite hidden. It seemed as if he had been entirely forgotten. "'Tis now winter out of doors," thought the tree. "The earth is hard and covered with snow. Men cannot plant me now, and therefore I have been put up here under shelter till the springtime comes. How thoughtful that is! How kind man is, after all! If it only were not so dark here and so terribly lonely. Not even a hare. And out in the woods it was so pleasant when the snow was on the ground and the hare leaped by. Yes, even when he jumped over me, but I did not like it then. It is really terribly lonely here." "Squeak, squeak," said a little mouse at the same moment, peeping out of his hole, and then another little one came. They sniffed about the fir tree and rustled among the branches. "It is dreadfully cold," said the mouse, "but for that it would be delightful here, old fir, wouldn't it?" "I am by no means old," said the fir tree. "There's many a one considerably older than I am." "Where do you come from?" asked the mice, "and what can you do?" They were so extremely curious. "Tell us about the most beautiful spot on the earth. Have you never been there? Were you never in the larder, where cheeses lie on the shelves and hams hang from above, where one dances about on tallow candles, that place where one enters lean and comes out fat and portly?" "I know no such place," said the tree, "but I know the woods, where the sun shines and where the little birds sing. And then he told all about his youth, and the little mice had never heard the like before, and they listened and said, "Well, to be sure! How much you have seen! How happy you must have been!" "I?" said the fir tree, thinking over what he had himself related. "Yes, in reality those were happy times." And then he told about Christmas Eve, when he was decked out with cakes and candles. "Oh," said the little mice, "how fortunate you have been, old fir tree!" "I am by no means old," said he. "I came from the woods this winter. I am in my prime, and am only rather short for my age." "What delightful stories you know," said the mice, and the next night they came with 4 other little mice, who were to hear what the tree recounted. And the more he related, the more plainly he remembered all himself, and it appeared as if those times had really been happy times. But they may still come. They may still come. Klumpy Dumpy fell downstairs, and yet he got a princess. And he thought of the moment of a nice little birch tree growing out in the woods, to the fir that would be a real charming princess. "Who is Klumpy Dumpy?" asked the mice. So then the fir tree told the whole fairy tale, for he could remember every single word of it, and the little mice jumped for joy to the very top of the tree. Next night 2 more mice came, and on Sunday 2 rats even, but they said the stories were not interesting, which vexed the little mice, and they too now began to think them not so very amusing either. "Do you know only one story?" asked the rats. "Only that one," answered the tree. "I heard it on my happiest evening, but I did not then know how happy I was." "It is a very stupid story. Don't you know one about bacon and tallow candles? Can't you tell any larder stories?" "No," said the tree. "Then goodbye," said the rats, and they went home. At last the little mice stayed away also, and the tree sighed. After all, it was very pleasant when the sleek little mice sat around me and listened to what I told them. Now that too is over, but I will take good care to enjoy myself when I am brought out again. But when was that to be? Why, one morning there came a quantity of people and set to work in the loft. The trunks were moved, the tree was pulled out and thrown, rather hard it is true, down on the floor, but a man drew him toward the stairs where the daylight shone. "Now a merry life will begin again," thought the tree. He felt the fresh air, the first sunbeam, and now he was out in the courtyard. All passed so quickly, there was so much going on around him, that the tree quite forgot to look to himself. The court adjoined a garden, and all was in flower. The roses hung so fresh and odorous over the balustrade, the lindens were in blossom, the swallows flew by and said, "Que vite, my husband is come," but it was not the fir tree that they meant. "Now, then, I shall really enjoy life," said he, exultingly, and spread out his branches. But alas, they were all withered and yellow. It was in a corner that he lay among weeds and nettles. The golden star of tinsel was still on top of the tree, and glittered in the sunshine. In the courtyard some of the merry children were playing, who had danced at Christmas round the fir tree, and were so glad at the sight of him. One of the youngest ran and tore off the gold star. "Only look what is still on the ugly old Christmas tree," said he, trampling on the branches so that they all cracked beneath his feet, and the tree beheld all the beauty of the flowers and the freshness in the garden. He beheld himself, and wished he had remained in his dark corner in the loft. He thought of his first youth in the woods, of the merry Christmas Eve, and of the little mice who had listened with so much pleasure to the story of Klumpy Dumpy. "'Tis over, 'tis past," said the poor tree. "Had I but rejoiced when I had reason to do so. But now 'tis past, 'tis past." And the gardener's boy chopped the tree into small pieces. There was a whole heap lying there. The wood flamed up splendidly under the large brewing copper, and it sighed so deeply. Each sigh was like a shot. The boys played about in the court, and the youngest wore the gold star on his breast which the tree had had on the happiest evening of his life. However, that was over now. The tree is gone, the story at an end. All was over. Every tale must end at last. The end.
We end with a sad Christmas story.
Good grief! Everyone okay? Who needs hugs?
I need hugs. That was, yeah. Good old fairy tales has to be a moral at the end.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Enjoy things while you can.
Yeah. Oof. How sad it is. I mean, it's Hans Christian Andersen. He did a lot of sad ones.
Yeah.
Like, good sad.
Boy.
Like,
Do you want to do the Wind in the Willow on there? Just sort of like...
Merry Christmas. Yeah, quite. Could do.
Merry Christmas.
Unless you want to read it.
I don't mind. I mean, I've just done one, so I don't mind
Okay.
if you want to.
Oh,
take
this
it.
one.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think this shall be your last one.
Yeah.
And then we shall let you all go. But yes, this is a little excerpt from The Wind in the Willows by Monsieur Kenneth Grahame. Yep, use now. It's called A Seasonable Sight. At last the rat succeeded in decoying him to the table, and had just got seriously to work with the sardine opener when sounds were heard from the forecourt without. Sounds like the scuffling of small feet in the gravel and a confused murmur of tiny voices, while broken sentences reached them. Now, all in a line. Hold the lantern up a bit, Tommy. Clear your throats first. No coughing after I say. 1, 2, 3. Where's young Bill? Oh, here, come on, do. We're all awaiting. What's up? Inquired the rat, pausing in his labours. I think it must be the field mice, replied the mole, with a touch of pride in his manner. They go round carol singing regularly at this time of the year. They're quite an institution in these parts. And they never pass me over. They come to Mole End last of all, and I used to give them hot drinks, and supper too sometimes when I could afford it. It will be like old times to hear them again. Let's have a look at them, cried the rat, jumping up and running to the door. It was a pretty sight, and a seasonable one that met their eyes when they flung the door open. In the forecourt, lit by the dim rays of a horn lantern, some 8 or 10 little field mice stood in a semicircle, red worsted comforters around their throats, their forepaws thrust deep into their pockets, their feet jigging for warmth. With bright, beady eyes they glanced shyly at each other, sniggering a little, sniffing and applying coat sleeves a good deal. As the door opened, one of the older ones that carried the lantern was just saying, "Now then, 1, 2, 3, and forthwith their shrill little voices uprose on the air, singing one of the old-time carols that their forefathers composed in fields that were fallow and held by frost, or when snow-bound in chimney corners, and handed down to be sung in the miry street to lamplit windows at Yule-time.